Crevan, how you doing?
I'm good, Rich. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks, mate. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah,
First LinkedIn Live, I take it?
Yes, this is my first time, so go easy.
Yeah, I'll do my best. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's 6 sessions. These are the highlight of my week, and I'm confident today's guest isn't going to ruin that for me. Today, we're going to talk about sales. Not the always be closing, phone bashing, sweatshop of top billers kind of sales, but real sales. The kind of sales built around quality engagements, the ones that really grow those sales numbers. We're going to talk about sales-led growth, sales channels, and where emotional intelligence fits into the whole sales picture. Today's guest has earned his sales stripes with the likes of Oracle, Dell, and now more recently, the big orange rocket ship that is HubSpot. We're also going to talk about the transition from sales to sales leadership and why some people choose to not. He's also a proud mayonnaise fan, according to his Twitter bio. Do you like what I did there?
I'll correct it.
It made me laugh. This week, I'm excited to introduce you to a sales leadership rock star who will hopefully give you insight into how you should be building, nurturing, and getting the most from your sales teams in a constantly changing market. These chats are designed to be short and sweet, but hopefully full of insight. And as a reminder, it's definitely unfiltered, which is the bit that makes it fun for me. And I'm hoping today won't be career-ending for either of us. I'd like to introduce you all to HubSpot's very own Crevan O'Malley. Is it O'Malley or O'Malley?
O'Malley works for me. You got the
Perfect.
first one right, which doesn't always happen. Lovely to be joining you today, Rich, and really looking forward to the conversation. The way you put it up there suits my style. I'm excited to be here. I want to quickly correct you on the mayonnaise thing. Obviously, there's no Dutch blood in me. It's a Mayo fan. I'm a pretty passionate sports guy. And top of the list is the Mayo GAA team. But those who work with me and know me will have no surprise on that one.
We actually have a Mally on our team as well, and he saw that we were speaking today, and he was like, "Oh, is it a County Mayo boy?" So I think he was happy. So first off, how's 2022 panning out for you?
Oh, a nice easy one to kick us off.
Yeah.
We talk about work-life balance. My wife talks about work-life blend because sometimes there's no balance. Family-wise, everybody's safe. I had my eldest finish his junior cert, which is the first state exam in secondary school this week. So we got through that pressure point. Family's safe and well, and I think that's a really important point for me. On the work side, there's two sides to that answer. I think there's the things you see, and there might be the things you don't see. I think what we see right now is a very, very difficult trading environment. HubSpot is not alone in navigating those difficult conditions. Tech in particular has maybe reset things from the highs of 20 and 21. We certainly got a tailwind post-pandemic for moves to digital and so on. And I think there's a little bit of a reset. There's still a lot of growth in the markets that we serve. But we're kind of navigating the economy and difficult trading conditions at the moment. I talked about unseen. I think it's a really good moment to check in with people. And when we try to hire amazing talent, all of us talk about resilience and grit. It's a pretty good time to show some of that, and let's have some real examples of showing that resilience and grit. I think people are being tested and strained more than they have been for a few years, and it feels like there's a lot that's been straining us for a while. But I'm seeing a huge amount of problem solving, creativity, and energy to work us through this current period and on to better days ahead, but also to learn our craft and to get better so that we're better positioned when downward upturns come down the line.
It's funny, isn't it? So when 2020 was obviously a shitstorm, and there was those kind of peaks and troughs of lockdowns, and I think as horrible as it sounds, there was almost like an adrenaline rush and an excitement at the beginning of it, and you're powering on through that, and then you get into that business as usual phase, and then it crashes, and then it's back up with another lockdown and changes in market. And we've had so many of those ups and downs, but now we're kind of setting almost into a business as usual of a constant up and down. And I think you talked about then creativity and problem solving, both of those are incredible skills to have, particularly from a sales context.
Yeah.
And I think that's but there's a level of energy that has to go into those. And I think that's one of the things that we focus on quite a lot is how do we address that burnout and try and keep star performers and everybody in that same kind of zone for as long as possible. But it's a challenge, particularly in sales.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
So for those who aren't familiar with HubSpot, what is it?
So we're global, we're an international business, we're a software company. Our product range is in the customer experience side of things. So people refer to as kind of the front of house as opposed to back office within businesses. We're B2B. We help companies grow, we help them scale. We're a CRM, customer relationship management platform. And I think the platform thing is really interesting because that's part of our differentiation. A lot of businesses need a lot of apps to do their day-to-day operations. And if you can, certainly on the CX piece, provide a platform where there's a joined-up connection of products and usage, then I think you avoid some of those downstream total cost of ownership problems that emerge when people are trying to daisy chain different applications together. So in the CRM space, good growth at the moment. There's a good opportunity for what we do. So in that sense, during pandemic and post-pandemic, I feel quite lucky. I'm a sales guy, and I think I probably could have ended up in the industry, but to end up in tech and certainly to be working for a company like HubSpot now, where we've navigated the period quite well, without bumps, quite well. I feel very lucky.
And what's your role at HubSpot?
So I am a sales director in our EMEA business. I will be here 3 years in August. Time flies. My responsibility extends to the kind of corporate part of the business. We have this phrase inside where we're moving up market. It sounds a lot easier on the side than it is in practice. But the bottom line for us is that excellent GTM model and value that we offer in small and medium-sized businesses, and we're a really good option for those companies to consider us. We can replicate that further up the enterprise side. We've got to build some credibility. We've got to make sure those people in those companies know who we are and what we do. We've got a good job executing some of those opportunities we're in. That gradual move up market is something that I'm heavily involved in, and really enjoying it at the moment.
So, without wanting to age you, you've been in sales for a bit. What's the biggest change you've seen since your heady days of being in Dell back in the very late 90s, to be clear? But what's the kind of the seismic shift you've seen since late 90s sales to 2022 sales?
Yeah, I'm very transparent with this. I joke with the team that I started in sales in the late 1900s. That always gets a giggle because a lot of people are born post 2000s. But I worked in Dell from 99. So you're very kind. It was late 1990s when selling laptops and cables and networks and servers was the SaaS of its day, and it was fast-paced and it was exciting and it was an amazing school of learning for a young salesperson. But when I look at what we're doing now, I kind of think in those types of businesses, there's definitely a pivot from that call center type environment to inside sales. And inside sales is something that I think benefits the entire sales ecosystem and professionals, because you get that balance in a much better way between time with family, time in office, time on the road. And I think when I look around me in HubSpot today and I think back to those days, I think the profile of the sellers and the traits that the best of us at any moment in time display have changed. And there's a much more diverse, richer, interesting set of characters around me. And I think the second thing is, I don't know that there was ever a shortage of data, but the ability to collate it, aggregate it, and get some meaningful insights has meant that we can be far more optimized in some of the things we're doing versus 20 plus years ago, that's for sure.
But Crevan, so there's a couple of people just saying in the comments there's a bit of an echo coming back from your audio now. Is your speaker mic, which have you got selected there?
I have, my apologies guys.
It's all good. It's the benefit of doing this live. So right, when I spoke to Jonathan Dick, we had to go through an excruciating process of not being able to hear each other on a live for a good 10 minutes. It was interesting.
I have moved you to the laptop now, so does somebody want to?
It works for me. It sounds clear. But if you can't hear, now the speaker's coming through, so I can hear me.
Sorry about this, Rich.
That's all right.
I don't think that's helping us.
The echo stopped. Can you hear us?
Back onto the headset.
That's fine.
Am I still echoing?
No, I couldn't hear the echo to begin with, but it seems like it sounds better than when you turn that off now.
Okay.
All good. So to give this whole conversation a bit of direction, what does a quality sales engagement look like in 2022? Why can't we just bash the phones anymore? So like you talked about moving away from that call center approach. Like what have we moved to, and why can't we do that old thing anymore?
Well, I think first of all, we definitely can't do that batch and blast, that spray and pray, hammer the phones. I think for me, any attempt at a connection involves disruption for the person that you're trying to speak to. So you have to be respectful of that, and timing is crucial. In many cases, what you want to talk about is very interesting for the target person, but you're going to get them doing the other 100 things that are priority for them in their given day. So the timing has to be right. I think you need to bring a focus to those conversations. I always shudder a little bit if I hear salespeople, or even coming out of my own mouth, talking to a prospect or a customer and saying things like just checking in. I mean, I don't think anybody has the time for that kind of question. You need to bring knowledge, you need to bring insight, and the volume of the connections you need to make because of that quality is reduced. So you need to make those count. And I think buyers rely on sellers to be additive in terms of their knowledge gain, because buyers are incredibly well researched and knowledgeable about self. So I think timing, quality, knowledge, and insight are ringing true. Whereas in the past, if you got a 0.5% response to I remember we used to do fax campaigns previously in my career. You kind of thought that was a good response, and those days are definitely gone. And some of that data thing that I talked about earlier, where you can bring some of that data to bear, makes those a lot more interesting and intelligent conversations for people to have.
Yeah, so like one of the it was Dan Tyre actually that one of his talks I listened to at one point. It was one of the most interesting shifts from my perspective has been from that buyer beware process to now it's seller beware, because the processes that used to work for you now, there's almost an accountability associated with that sales process now, because the buyers have all of that power and actually have a voice in the process as well, which changes that dynamic like drastically.
Yeah, and it's I don't know if I want to use the word power, but for sure buyers are a hell of a lot more knowledgeable than perhaps they were in the past, when you relied on the seller to tell you the features, the functions. We don't like to demo those now, we need to go deeper. But there was a place for that in the past where that information wasn't readily available. All of that kind of directional guides, knowledge share is online, and combining that digital brand and message that you have out there, that you try to intersect those buyers that, we talk about the moment that matters. And if you do at the right time, and they have an ear for what it is you want to talk about, you've got to make those minutes count. And you've got to be interesting, which sounds really basic. It doesn't always happen. You've got to be really knowledgeable, and you've certainly got to bring insight and focus to their day for that 10 minutes, half an hour demo, whatever it is. And if you're providing value, in my kind of framework of sales, you're never focused on closing the sale. You're focused on the next step, and if there's a good next step from a conversation we've just had, then you're selling, because then you're retaining interest and you'll probably get brought into other rooms within the company, and that's important.
So almost focusing on like the momentum or like journey rather than kind of like the end point. I think, yeah, it's a good analogy. A lot of sales leadership seems to be like a practically learned skill from my perspective. People normally cite like mentors or a particular sales manager at some point in their career. How have you honed your skills over the years? Not year.
Yeah, years. That's a great question. I'm sure there's a character or two that'll come out. I think the first thing I'd say about my sense of growth and the journey I've been on is definitely an observational quality to what I've done. And you talked about mentors or coaches or influences, and I'm quite sure half the people who I encounter don't even know that that's what they were to me in my career and in my journey. So for sure, when I start a new job or I move to a new company, watching and listening and, you know, recognizing the fact that listening with intent isn't just something you need to talk about as a skill, but you need to put it into practice. And just hoovering up knowledge earlier in my career as much as I could. I've said this recently to people. It's always stood me positively to take on the sort of problem or the difficult challenge. And that's not to say anybody in my team has an easy challenge, but I've always, in the different companies I've worked for, kind of ended up in the slightly unscripted, maybe challenging, difficult space that perhaps maybe we're not as naturally suited, and we've got to build something. I really enjoy that. I've worked, I mean, you mentioned Dell and you mentioned Oracle. So I definitely have that kind of corporate badge within me, and I really enjoyed my time
in the medical space as well, though, didn't you?
Yeah, like the bit in the middle was 12 years working for a startup. I think I was the seventh or eighth person in the door, and we grew and we scaled. So the things we're trying to talk about, I lived that, and that was for 12 years. So the vast majority of my time was in that world. And I think having that combination of experience between really, bootstrap startup to corporate with resource, there's pros and cons on both sides, and I learned an incredible amount. The founder of the startup and the CEO right through, and remains, the business has iterated a few times, was a guy called Howard Beggs. And obviously working with Howard and that team for 12 years had a huge influence on me. But I'll always remember, even in difficult times, Howard would ask questions like, and this is going to sound really simplistic, are we having fun? And it wasn't worth it if we weren't. And if we lost the sale or if we missed a target, he almost doubled down and brought the team out for a beer and just made sure that they understood, you know, targets have to be delivered, and monthlies and quarterlies and half year quotas. We got to step up to that. It's a performance based role, but you're not supposed to hit every target. That's not just the nature of sales. And you may learn more in the difficult periods, which we're kind of going through at the moment. The real talent has a way of differentiating itself maybe more in challenging times than it does when everybody is performing. And for sure, I kind of learned that from him. And he was a classic entrepreneur. And I think even in the large corporates now, the entrepreneur mindset is to be nurtured and celebrated, because we're now in that place where the buyers have the knowledge. You've got to be able to flex and pivot. And if you're simply going to run the playbook from 1 to 10, people see through that and they don't feel it's authentic. So having that balance of, an entrepreneurial mindset. I'm not an entrepreneur. I absolutely wouldn't have the ability to do it, but I love talking to them and I love being surrounded by them, and there's an energy. And I definitely think I've got a little bit, or learned a little bit of that sort of an entrepreneurial spirit and mindset from my time in the startup world.
Well, I think that element. So one of our core values at Six and Flow is around playfulness, and
Yeah.
for me, that's not just kind of like pissing about, like doing whatever we want to do with them, but it's giving people the space to almost sandbox their environment, so like experiment and enjoy the process. Like that for me is the biggest driver. So like I'm not financially driven. That's not the reason I get out of bed and do what I do. The reason I do it is because I enjoy the process. And so therefore, like as we've tried to grow the company, because companies like ours are built initially in the image of the founder. And we've tried to build that environment where it is a fun space to be in. And like, there's a lot of hard work to be done, and it's not all sunshine and rainbows all the time. But it is that, for me, is the most important aspect of what we've tried to build. Otherwise, like I mean, it'd be easier for me to go and work for somebody else if that was kind of the thing that I was chasing. But for me, that fun bit is important, and particularly from it. I always, in my mind's eye, and it's going to sound like a rubbish analogy, I always think of salespeople almost as like the fighter pilots, the Mavericks, the ones wearing the cool shades and the leather jackets, and that there's an element of excitement that is driving that for them, because I mean nobody wants to go through the trudgery of kind of like, if it's just order taking and things like that. There's a challenge associated to it as well. But and that for me is the bit that I find fun when I'm involved in the sales process.
Listen, I mean, I'm very happy to be in the role I'm in now, and I lead some incredible people. But like in my core, the most exciting part of my day is talking to a customer, or maybe celebrating with a rep and a team who closed a phenomenal deal that I know blood, sweat, and tears went into. So that sort of that payback, that gratification you get from sticking with the process and going through, all the models and frameworks and sales process tips that you've learned over the years is great, but it's that energy you get. And the reality is, for salespeople, like I'm 23 years working in tech sales this year, and I have spent the vast majority of that career explaining a miss or building a recovery plan. And that's not to shock anybody who thinks, God, I thought this guy was successful. Like, I think that's been successful. Like, am I trusted? Do Ed and the team in HubSpot have confidence in me that this is not supposed to be easy, but, people will be part of his team. People will be part of that broader group. People will enjoy their work, and we celebrate the small wins along the way. And there's nothing better. There's no better feeling than hitting a target or delivering a deal. And I mean, I love it. I'm a sales guy, but it's interesting. I don't know that as a career choice, it has that broader brand and profile that I think it should, because it's an incredible place to work, whatever your industry in selling and sales and marketing.
But it's definitely a performance culture, right? So like you can't. It's not something you can come in like you have to graft. You have to deliver on kind of the promises made. And I think that's part of the allure of sales, is around that kind of, there's an immediate reflection or kind of understanding of how you're achieving. Like there's feedback there. And I think that, like for a lot of people, that's an important kind of association.
I mean, that's for sure. Yeah.
I got a couple of questions from LinkedIn. Patrick's asked, how do you balance sales numbers and sales leadership at the same time? So how, like, and I'm presuming there, so you've got targets, salespeople have got targets. How do you then also kind of managing the leadership process and people missing targets as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's science to all of this. I think fundamentally, sales is a performance game. So if you have difficulty with, managing numbers and working under pressure and delivering to targets, it's a difficult place to be. But I think if you can master that, it can be a really energetic and positive place. I think, performance-based roles for sure, whether you're an individual contributor, a manager, director, whatever your responsibility is. And I think no matter what your role, somebody's performance is linked to their behavior. Like what you do sets you up for success or not. And I don't want to go off on a tangent on sort of psychologically profiling people, but I have had occasion to do a little bit of study around the psychology of selling and, CBT, and the fact that if we feel negative about something, it kind of comes out or if we think negatively, it comes out in how we feel, how we act, and ultimately in sales, if you're not feeling confidence and set up for success, you're definitely not going to hit your numbers. So there's a sort of a relentless positivity needed in sales, and people would, you know, on occasion in my career, I have been described as being very positive. That's both by design and by natural style. You know, whatever the problem, we need to break it down to its smallest individual piece and work back a plan to improve on whatever the performance is in that moment. I think people can get drowned by numbers as well, frankly, and I don't subscribe to the micromanagement piece. I think we need to set expectations with salespeople. We need to treat them like adults. We need to be clear on what the targets of the business are. And honestly, we kind of need to get out of their way a little bit and let them execute and not measure them every day or every week, and let them try and fail and iterate and improve. And I think the real success for salespeople is in recognizing, you know, their formula, whatever that is, of deals and average price and close, just being really detailed on the numbers, and then knowing that, you know, big growth and big success doesn't come in a big bang. It comes through marginal gains. And if you can improve your process, and if you can improve your outputs, but not focused on the outputs, focus on the inputs, you just want to continue in a kind of a forward direction, and I think you'll be quite satisfied with that. The other thing that's just top of mind for numbers is, and I remember we had a chief operations officer in HubSpot when I joined, JD, and he used to always talk about, you know, share price. There's another number that publicly traded companies seem to take a pulse from. You know, I don't think he said this, but definitely it's the message I took. We got to ignore that. You know, we totally cannot control that number, but we can control an awful lot of what we do from an execution perspective. And if we do that, we create energy. You talked about energy a minute ago. We take momentum. We create momentum. We create purpose. And I think the most devastating thing for me in a sales org is if there was ambiguity in what we're doing and apathy, you know, in the group. You know, whether we're hitting the number or not is the result, but the journey and the mood and the atmosphere in the group has to be business-like, and as you said, playful and fun too.
That kind of resilience and that kind of positivity, I think that's of our sales org. So we've got 6 people, including me, that are involved in sales. And I think one of the things that I'm quite proud of is that the ability to bounce back when, like, we have a loss, and having that kind of outlook on it. So and Charlotte, our growth director, she's currently on mat leave, but I remember being quite taken back about, like, her approach. Like, I remember when she first started with us, we lost quite a big deal.
Yeah.
And at first she was like, I'm really bummed by that. And then almost immediately she was like, you win some, you lose some. What can I learn from that? So, like, we lost that. What can I take from that experience? Was it process? Was it price? Was it positioning? Okay, the next one will be better. And then we won't lose on that basis. And I think that for us as an organization is what has helped us grow. And I think to a T, everybody in our organization has that positive outlook of, we lost that one, but okay, let's go get the next one and we'll make it better.
Yeah, I think that's amazing, and the people you talk about, I know some of them, and I'm not surprised at all. When I was in Oracle, just the nature of that business was all of the deals were quite large. So if you lost one, you were losing quite a large deal. And I think there's almost a ritual that you need to go through. So, like, if a rep lost the deal, I was working with a senior VP at the time, and she used to ask me, "Did you have the funeral?" Because that was the word I used, where you'd grab the individual, you'd go for a coffee, and you just have a sort of a demarcation between what we were trying to do, what can we get out of it, go for a walk outside, and then, you know, like your team, just get back on the horse, because, you know, sales in its simplest form, it is numbers, and it's the ability to manage and influence your numbers in an incrementally positive way. But, you know, if we had 100% close rate, I think industries would probably automate us quite quickly. The fact that the human influence on this is a little bit intangible, and, you know, talking about those losses sometimes from a coaching perspective gives people who weren't even involved in the deal much more insight than what an amazing deal we closed yesterday, you
know. So I've got another question from, it was a great question, the first one there, Patrick, thanks for that. Cal has asked, do you use sequences for your outreach?
So yes and no, right? And I think the successful salespeople and successful sales teams don't have one type of anything, right? And there's no doubt that automation has brought an incredible efficiency to businesses, and it's brought an incredible efficiency to ourselves. Like, we use our own platform and we use our own system. And I think depending on where people are in, we can talk flywheel, but ultimately in that funnel, if you think about it, depending on where people are and where people need to be nurtured or brought through on a journey, that customer journey, to the point where they actually will benefit from speaking to your salespeople, I think well-crafted sequences are an incredibly powerful tool there. If that was your only job in sales, you'd use them. The successful salespeople have the ability to pivot across that type of prospect who's a sort of a medium to longer term and more near sight. Maybe it's developing an account from install-based selling. Maybe it's, selecting within the thousands. You could go for 5 or 10 really interesting accounts because you think there's something valuable you can deliver to them and you want to talk to somebody. I think in those cases, my answer is no. You've got to do some research and you've got to craft an email or an in-mail or a voice note or whatever it is, be as creative as you can, because not one outreach channel works. They all work in a blend. And you've got to make them feel like you're talking to them and there's personality behind what you're saying. And you've picked up something, whether it's, a shared contact, a crossover on a university, some funding, they hired somebody new, whatever that might be. And I think if you're going to talk locally and personally, I'm talking hyper personalization, I think that's a spot where the human in the sales engine collaborates with the technology. And I think in those cases, perhaps they're not as effective sequences.
It's probably because I'm in the industry, right? But I have a real appreciation for, even if I don't want to buy the product, if somebody outreaches to me in a way that resonates, I haven't seen before, or like they've just done it really well, they'll either get a like, look, I'm not going to buy from you, but like I really appreciate the effort, or like I am willing to have that conversation because you can understand the effort that's actually gone into that. Because effective outreach takes effort, regardless if there's automation behind it. Because even if you're using sequences, if you're not personalizing them and making, like you were talking about, like hyper personalizing them. So like if I were to reach out to you, I would be looking at your LinkedIn profile, looked and see that you've got like junior rugby kind of coaching stuff, your Mayo man, like all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Building that into the sequences, I can still use the automation to make sure that I'm like, because effectively it's a numbers game. I can't remember the piece of research. I think it was HubSpot and Salesforce that both did different things. I think it's between like 4 and 8 touch points for somebody to engage or whatever that is. You can take the legwork and like the thinking of, oh, now I've got to send that, now I've got to send that. But you still have to put in the effort to make sure that actually resonates with that person. I think that's where, I mean, it drives me nuts when I get the connect on LinkedIn and an immediate sales pitch. And I'm like, this just doesn't work. And if you took any time to understand who I am, you would see that my social media is full of me complaining about people outreaching to me like that. So it's never going to work. And I think that's where that balancing that human piece with that automation, that's where the teams are the most effective.
Well, 100%. You articulated there really clearly for me. I think the other thing is, like, if anybody has a Gmail account or a Hotmail account back in the day, look at the rubbish coming through there, and that's B2C. Put targets and prospects that, if we're successful, puts money in our pockets through that type of noise. Like, and I think you're right, and I love the fact that even if you're not buying, if somebody's done a well-crafted pitch or note or email to you, you take the time to appreciate it. I think that gives that person who's in business development a bit of energy to go again. And again, they're not supposed to have 100% conversion rate. They're supposed to just create the energy to do it again and do it a little bit better. And I think that's great that you do that. But this is kind of our world. So when we see it done well, I think we should take the time to recognize it.
What's one of the most common challenges you see across a sales team? So you've been involved with a bunch of sales team. You currently lead a high performance sales team now. What's one of the most common challenges you see?
Um, I think developing a common purpose. I talked earlier about, that energy, that intangible momentum, that sort of shared experience that you can create on a team, whether it's hybrid or in office. And I think when that's missing, you really need to take note, and you really need to listen and get feedback directly from those who are with you. I think that's not easy. I think a shared pathway, so that people feel they're part of something bigger. I sometimes talk to my managers, and we've incredible senior leadership in HubSpot, and Yamini Rangan, our CEO in particular. I love just listening to the way she simplifies a corporate strategy, let's say, right? But if I just roll out her message, it's hard for people to connect with that as an individual. So sometimes I use language like, in my own role, I got to take that amazing message, I got to break it down and translate it into packets of work where people can see, okay, this goal that HubSpot has in 2022, if I create this amount of deals per month, literally down to that type of mechanics, I'm part of that journey. That's something to be proud of. That's something to get excited about. You'll be rewarded well in sales if you're successful, but to feel like you're part of something, to me anyway, in my career, has always driven more kind of loyalty and commitment to the vision or the purpose if I'm surrounded by people who are similarly motivated. And I take the responsibility when we're having poor days or poor weeks that, I probably haven't got that message across as cleanly as I want. I mean, the management books will call that alignment, and making sure that, instead of having people pointing in various different directions, we are more than the sum of our parts if we're all really clear on what it is we're trying to do, what the optimized way to do is, but actually give people a little bit of autonomy to test and shape and fail and come back better, and have that culture of sharing and open communications. I think if you do that, you get really strong alignment, and then the performance amplifies, and people feel like they're part of something. And I think when you don't have that, it's a very, very difficult place to be.
Well, we use a management structure called EOS, so Entrepreneur's Operating System. A bunch of agencies use it. It's a framework, effectively.
Yeah.
And one of the principles within that is everyone has a number. So, and what that means is, so we have company goals, right? So we want to grow to a certain point, and that'll be made up of financial targets. There's some kind of like softer goals in there about positioning and that kind of element. But then all of that breaks down to, like, to your point, when that comes down to the sales team, they have their target is their number, and that feeds into that overall kind of arching goal. And everybody can see that. Like, where does that come into this? How does that feed into it? And you're right. Like, having that I don't want to go into like purpose and mission, because I think that's slightly different. Like, having that, like, alignment is a good word. Like, if I do this, that will help us achieve this. And having that understanding gives you that, like, it's an element of engagement and almost camaraderie of, like, we are all pushing or pulling in the same direction. And that builds up that kind of, everyone's in it for the common good, but we're all doing well in the same process as well.
Yeah. No, I think that's crucial. And I think, the role of senior leadership, I mean, this mightn't sound easy, but that's the job, right? It's to inspire, and it's to bring people with you. And I mentioned Yamini, but our senior leadership in HubSpot, and it's not my first job, I think we do a particularly good job at that. Now, we don't get everything right, and we've got to iterate as we go, and there's a flexibility to the plan that we are open to change and adjust as needs be. And that in itself is a trait of high performing teams. But yeah, I definitely feel excited when I hear those messages. And it's not lost on me that it's my job to create that type of commitment in the teams that I work with.
So I spoke to Katie Burke on a Six Sessions a couple of months ago, and previous to that, John Dick. And one of the things that it struck me from both of them is all of the HubSpot leadership seem to have a real aptitude for self-reflection. So not just looking at the kind of the company itself, but understanding how they could be better, how their role fits into it, and what their like I'm yet to meet a HubSpot in a leadership role who is a finger pointer. It's much more, how can we do this? How can we improve this? How could I be better in this process? And I think it's impressive to see, particularly in such a high growth business.
Yeah, and I think, listen, in many ways, culture bubbles up from, the ground in organizations, but the pulse and the initial commentary around it, I guess, is set from the top. And you mentioned two very, very inspiring leaders in our world. And the other thing about those two people, and it's consistent across the very senior leadership, is, we talk about spans and layers and control and direct reports, and just everybody is incredibly accessible, right? And if one of my reps slacks Katie or John with a question, I know they'll get an answer. And in other organizations, I know I'm not going to be going, oh my God, why would you not come through the chain? The chain is nonsense. Like, it needs to be much more fluid. And people need to know that those questions and that feedback directly to John, directly to Katie, Yamini, that's gold. Like, that's going to help me do my job if they help make a point to those. And there's a really fluid communication style within the business. And it does feel like people are on the same page. Like I said, we've got challenges and we've got problems and we've made mistakes, but we're learning from them. We're having that kind of deal funeral that I talked about, and we're trying to get better. And that's a sense I get in the organization across the board.
It's funny that you call them funerals. On our side, we call them postmortems. So pretty much the same thing.
Without the knives.
So since the Brexit vote back in 2016, it seems like there's been a never-ending roller coaster of geopolitical shitstorms. We've had wars, the Great Plague of 2020, Bojo, Trump, and that's just naming a handful of them. How has that changed sales and sales leadership? What did 2020 do to a role like yours?
Oh God, look at the hit list you gave me there. Like, just disruption, volatility. How do we navigate it? I'll always remember I was reporting to Christian at the time, Christian Kinnear, our chief sales officer, and he brought me into an office and said, we're all going home tomorrow. I was actually, slight funny story, it was month 6 of my time with HubSpot, so that probationary period, and I just had to go. It's not me that's going home. We're all going home. Good, because I wondered, was there a message in there? But no, we were all going home. And like, how do we put this together? What do we do? And I think, as it transpired, 2020 and 2021, from a commercials perspective, were good years for HubSpot because we're part of that digital environment that was the solve for the problems that most industries and most businesses found themselves up against. Once that initial shock of, oh my God, we're really living a pandemic here, businesses need to plot a course. And what company doesn't have a version of a growth plan? And if they've got a growth plan, they're willing to make an investment. And if they want to make an investment, they'll back and support and partner with the best people. So we need to get back up on the horse and be the best people. But given that direction and creating that energy and momentum, I'm going to say all over again, because you mentioned the late 90s. Like, I thought as a sales leader, the trick that I had was in the office, managing by walking around and having people here where I can create a buzz and have huddles. And now suddenly I'm sitting on my kitchen table with a laptop going, oh my God, it's like there's a bit of imposter syndrome developing here. And open communication, shared purpose, clear direction, and simplify. Like, we had to do a huge amount of remove friction and simplify the messages to people, because people are dealing with an awful lot at that time, 2020, which has very little to do with HubSpot, but has an incredible impact on their ability to turn up and do a day's work. So, we were very empathetic. I think, from my perspective, led the way in terms of solving for our customers, our partners, and our people, to make sure that if the version of them that turns up is anything less than optimized, they need to take a bit of time and they need to step back. So I think just navigating that slowly, not jerking the wheel in either direction too aggressively, and sort of been very honest with people that we're solving this as we go, and let's have a positive attitude to it. Let's prioritize how people feel, and let's make sure we're close enough to them that they share how they feel with us. And we got through it. Now, if we were in aviation or hospitality, I'm not sure that would have worked. But look, we're in the industry we are. And again, at the top of the chat, I kind of felt, God, I feel very lucky to be in tech sales.
It's funny. So the beginning of the first lockdown, we like as a leadership team at Six and Flow, the initial phases were what are we going to do? How long can we keep the lights on? If all of our clients disappear, what are we going to do? What's the process? How do we keep it going for as long as possible? And then it very quickly turned into shit. There's a lot of work to be done. A lot of people now want our services. And I think for us, it boiled down to two things. One was people realized that they now needed to go digital. So trade shows didn't work. Events don't work. They need to move digital. That was part of it. And I spoke to a couple of clients or prospects at the time, and they were like, well, everything else is fucked. We might as well do the big projects now that are going to be disruptive. So it's this perfect storm of, okay, now we've got a lot of work. And then it flipped the other way as a leadership team going, all right, well, how do we expand? How do we work successfully remotely? Because our culture was always built on shoulder to shoulder kind of, we've got a nice office, like that kind of thing.
Whiteboarding, brainstorming,
And then and what are the right tools for us and all that kind of stuff. And then it moved to, all right, how do we avoid the burnout piece? Because we've got that emotional trauma that everybody's facing regardless of work. It's like, are my family going to be safe? Am I going to be healthy? Am I going to keep my job? Am I going to be able to pay the rent? And then they've got the stresses of work. And it was like a really quick transition of only a couple of weeks of disaster planning for one and then disaster planning for the other. And it was a real, I think it, like I said at the beginning, it was almost like like peaks and troughs of adrenaline going through that process. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, I'm really tired now. Like, what do we do now?
And you mentioned Casey, our CPO, Chief People Officer. Like, Casey is the head of that people ops organization, and even the facilities teams in HubSpot. And they're kind of behind the scenes in terms of, you talked about, if sales have the leather jackets and the aviators, I'm not quite sure that's the reality, but let's pretend they do. There's an incredible army of people who are creating an environment and an infrastructure in which, challenges accepted, we could do our job through that period. I don't think your job is to get everything right all the time, but I reflect on that period and the people ops team and the facilities team. I don't think they got much wrong. They were there for us and they navigated it with flexibility and empathy. And like I said, if people were overwhelmed and couldn't perform, the last thing you need to be doing is nailing them with metrics and kind of time punching. You got to be there for your people. I think, ultimately, the fact that humans have an effect in the sales and marketing discipline means people like me and you and others will still be in there. I think if we didn't have that influence, we're getting automated. So the fact that we're a group of people is really important to HubSpot, and it's really important to me.
Yeah. So before I interviewed Katie, actually, I asked a couple of HubSpotters, like, what is she like? What's her role within the business? How do you engage with her? And everyone I spoke to said throughout that pandemic, the way that she communicated and the volume of communication and keeping everybody aware of what was happening in the organization, that was the difference maker for them throughout that process. And sometimes people don't realize the effort that goes into that kind of thing. And I think it's good to have that kind of leadership.
And organizations, they had kind of 24 hours to put these sort of, disaster recovery teams and war rooms together to respond to it. I'll also remember, the quality of the communications and the prioritization of people over profit, frankly, right? The people were our route to getting back commercially, and we prioritized them. I remember some updates where, people might be feeling a little bit ambiguous about what's going on with offices or what's going on with health and safety of people. And if at any time where we didn't have an answer or a decision wasn't ready, her and her team still communicated. So you felt that, okay, there's a prioritization of the people here, which I think is crucial.
So switching gear again, so HubSpot was known for the funnel, and now we talk about the flywheel. How has that changed sales for the customer? So what has that done to the customer experience now?
Yeah, I mean, late 1990s, Brian had to pitch a few times for me to jump onto the flywheel. Love a funnel, but for sure, there's lessons in the flywheel. And I think if I step back from it, I think, you know, in my career in hardware and in other businesses, the sale was the end point. The sale was the end of something. You got the sale, you celebrated it, and you moved on. And, did you know whether value was driven from what you positioned? Did you check in with that customer? In a lot of cases, no, and you just moved on, and that was sales. I think now sales, it's not the start point, because such an amount happens that arms and informs customers about you and their problems before they ever end up talking to somebody. But in some ways, to just compare and contrast, the sale is just the beginning, right? They've gone out there and they've assessed, and they've got loads of options, and people have choice, right? There's no monopolies floating around in this industry. People have choice, and you've got to earn their business, and you've got to earn the right to make them feel like they'll trust you. And if you do manage to strike a contract with somebody, especially in SaaS, that choice remains the whole time. And it's almost like, don't feel beaten down by the fact that you have to resell your services or your value all the time, but you do, because they can move. And data interoperability means our best customer could move to Salesforce or Microsoft, within a short period of time, and we don't want that to happen. So we have to constantly service them in a great way and in a delightful way, and give them great customer experience. And I think that's where the value of our platform comes through, because you're able to get a 360 view of our customers and arm them with data and arm them with insights, so that the risk of churn or the risk of losing to competitors is mitigated and reduced. It'll still happen, because you're not going to get everything right all the time. But that ability to build loyalty and create a connection with your customers, that's a long-term partnership. And as they grow, you win, which is the promise of SaaS, right? If there's no deal we do today that if they stagnate and stay still, it's been worth our while. We've got to make sure that they're ridiculously successful. And the more successful our customers are, and we lean on people like you and the team all the time for this, they'll see real value in the products that we sell. And I think that's possibly the difference. It's a continuous dialogue now.
Well, and one of the things that makes HubSpot quite different to a lot of the other like SaaS orgs out there that we work with or aware of in that space is you are very quick to bring in your existing customers into the sales process, as in reference calls, like case studies, and introducing, and it makes a huge difference in that, because people can then actually have a person-to-person conversation, third party. How is this working for you? How does it fit? What was the process? And I think that you can only do that if you're offering a good product first and foremost, but also the process to get using that good product has been kind of frictionless, or as frictionless as it can be.
Yeah, and it's amazing, like the really informed, mature, experienced buyers, ultimately there's a bill of materials and there's a pound sign or euro sign in front of it. But they want to know what happens when I sign the contract. Like, what does the implementation piece look like? Who, like, whether it's our services team or we're engaging with you guys in Six and Flow, like who literally is turning up, right? Is it Crevan? Is it Rich? Who's going to be on that call? Who's going to be in front of me periodically? And they want to know what that journey looks like. And like reference cases and customers who are willing to speak well of the experience they have with your business. I mean, that's the best marketing channel in the world. And I definitely, I've used references all throughout my career, but there's definitely a cohort of HubSpot customers that it's more than references. Like it's promoters and advocates, and they really like the product. And I'm not, like, again, I'm at this a while. I'm not sort of drinking Kool-Aid here and losing the run of myself, but I'm always pleasantly, um, take a moment to step back and be grateful for that, because a happy customer who's basically receiving the value that you thought they would if they invested X, I mean, that's the holy grail, and that will sell more, and they will grow. And if they grow in SaaS usage, means they'll pay you more, but they'll pay more because they're getting more in the background as well. That's the model, and that's a great place to be, because there's an energy to that relationship that is far more interesting for me than transaction type sales, where it's a product or service, but once it's done, it's done in one, and you move on.
Simon's just asked a question. He's interested in what the future model looks like in your organization. Fully remote, mandated, minimum days back in facility, hybrid by choice. Like how are you bringing the teams in? What's going on?
Yeah, I'm really interested with the markets and other businesses, and I constantly watch not just our competitors, because I think when we're in a market where real talent, has choice and mobility, then it's not just the guys we compete in our products that we're competing with for that talent. It's companies that will give great employee experiences, and that could be in any industry. I'm sort of surprised by some of the announcements by some businesses that we're post-pandemic now, so we go back to what was, which was office-based. HubSpot has been to the fore on some of this communication, and again, back to the people ops people navigating us through this period. We're never going back. Remote is now the biggest office we have, and how we keep those people connected is the challenge. We absolutely will continue to open offices, because depending on where people are in their careers, or depending on their work practices and lifestyle and where they get energy from, the office is still going to be a really important part of the infrastructure for sales and servicing that we do with our customers. So for sure, everybody, for the last couple of years and into the future, has total autonomy to choose office, remote, or what we call flex. And now that we're in this kind of post-pandemic world, we're sort of thinking about what flex means. Is it 2 to 3 days in the office? What works for teams? What works for an optimized and a productive environment? Because there's no doubt, if somebody said they want flex, they want that experience. They want that sense of whiteboard and energy and sales floor, but they want both, and that's totally fine with us. And I think that's definitely the future for us. Like we've hired some incredible people who may never come into an office, and yet we've managed to onboard them and engage them and excite them. And I'm really, really proud of that. But for sure, that kind of flexible option, that hybrid working style is here to stay for HubSpot.
What, out of interest, what are you doing? Like, what's your split?
Flex. So your studio technology is such that people can probably see I'm in a converted bedroom in the attic of the house. And what I'm trying to do is, chatting to Ed about this today, I'm trying to get to a sort of a happy medium where I can kind of commit to a structure or a routine, so that if it's 2 days a week, I'll try and make it, Wednesday or Thursday, or Tuesday, and people know, Crevan works from home these days and he's in the office these days. And, if partners are coming over, if we want to meet the team, if we want to do some of that brainstorming stuff that helps the creativity and the juices and the enjoyment of the job, the playfulness, well, we know we'll be in the office in this day in the future. But I love the balance, right? I've got 2 young kids, 16 and 14. We got a dog during lockdown. It's fantastic to have that flexibility, as well as benefit from incredible collaborative working spaces that are the HubSpot offices. It's the best of both worlds, really.
So you, before we did this, you said, how long are we going to be doing this for? And I said, we're not interesting enough to do this any more than about 45 minutes. We're already in an hour. Are you still good for time? Because I've got more.
Yeah, no, I hope some of our listeners are,
I'm not even worried about them. So empathy and understanding in both sales and marketing post 2022, it's seen as two of the most important skills. So like you talk about like the future of marketing, like all those kind of things. Everybody's talking about empathy. Why do you think that is, and how can sellers use that to their advantage now?
Yeah, this is a really important one. And when we were going through the pandemic, literally through those trading months, we had an amazing report that we topped up and just showed the data across industry around what was working and what was not working and where the pressure points were. your ability to be empathetic to we call them prospects or customers, right? These are people, humans. Your ability to make a connection and genuinely, with authenticity, come across like you're prioritizing their problem is 101 in sales, right? If you're going to understand the problem that you're about to pitch a solution for, you know, you have to use empathy and understanding, because you've got to open up that customer to be confident and comfortable enough and trusting enough to share. And when they do, you got to shut up and listen. Earlier in my career, I remember I was doing a presentation, and it was to a C-suite, and about a half an hour before the call, I think I had 30 minutes canned, and I was told I had 15 minutes. And like, this is normal, right? C-suites, things, still should have been very grateful I was for the 15 minutes. But in my mind, the way I process the challenge is like, okay, I still have to say what I want to say. So if I talk at 2x, and like, this is crazy stuff, you have to be able to prioritize, and you have to be able to make decisions in the moment. And every time you're talking to a prospect or a customer, there is a depth and a richness to what they're saying that sometimes some sellers miss, because we're so interested in telling them what we want to tell them. And that's not interesting. And you've got to make them feel like you're really listening. Because I think if you listen, you'll understand. And if you really understand, you may or may not have a solution to solve. But I think we're at that point where, if we want to be authentic in our communications, if we don't have the right solve for customers, I think we're at an age now where we need to back away and give them the advice that, look, we're qualifying out here for these reasons. This isn't a good fit for HubSpot. This won't be a good fit for you. And sometimes I've been in conversations where having that approach actually opens them up more, because they kind of go, oh, hang on a second, like, well, let me really tell you what's going on here. Okay, well, now we're talking. And I think the other thing is, post-COVID, for customers and partners and colleagues, like, the value of time is something that's really important. You always see these posts about, God, I'm saving 3 hours a day in the commute. That's 15 hours a week, and it sounds like it's hundreds of hours over the year. Well, I think we've a value that we place on our time now that maybe we took for granted 3 years ago. So we want to have good experiences and rich experiences when we're not working, and we sure as hell want them when we are working. And we're not going to waste time talking to, a pitch in the sort of small p version. So that insight, that value, that conversation that you bring, it comes more readily from an empathetic, traded person. And it's interesting here, I'm not going on a tangent, but like, this isn't to be in any ways negative about me or male sellers, but that skill set, the proof is there. It comes more naturally to female sellers than it does to male sellers. There's just a natural empathetic. And I think what's really exciting for me is the talent on the female side of our organization that's joined in the last couple of years. And it's an amazing opportunity for male leaders and male sellers to learn and craft, because you can definitely get better at the sales game over time. And it's about sharing what works and what doesn't. But we've got some amazing female leaders and female sellers in the business, and how they pivoted during and post pandemic is kind of wow. Let's do some more of that.
Well, so I mentioned Charlotte earlier, and so Charlotte
Yeah.
was our first dedicated sales team member that joined the company.
Yeah, she's
and
great.
It was one of those things, like, I learned an awful lot from her, just in the way that she would ask things, and the way that she would position things, and the way that she would just keep asking to kind of get to the root of that. Like, we talk about like the 5 whys, but actually making it part of the conversation. I think that's where sometimes you can spot where a salesperson is going for that kind of challenge-based sale. They're asking the questions, but not actually really listening to what's coming back. And then you end up in this really weird space of, like, you don't understand what I'm talking about. Like, I don't feel like you've gotten this. And actually, so when I sell, and I don't classify myself as a salesperson at all, but when I sell, the thing that I enjoy about the process is actually trying to figure out what the challenge is. So like, what is the challenge? What is the actual use case? How is this going to impact your day-to-day role? And I think that's I would say I am naturally quite an empathetic person.
Yeah.
Sometimes, where and that's how that's the framework I use to make sure that I'm kind of digging into that and trying to actually genuinely understand what we're trying to solve here. Because everything that we do, for me, sales is about problem solving. So I have a solution, you have a problem. Let's see if this solution fits that, and actually also be willing. So for me, that empathy bit is also be willing to go, this isn't going to be right for you. Like this will not do what you need it to do.
Yeah. The other thing on that, I was just thinking as you're talking, like what is experience, right? You kind of know what it is when you have it, and you maybe don't value it when you don't. And we're an incredible place for young sales talent, like first, second job. And I get such an amount of energy from our business development organization and our sales, our small business teams, which is kind of the starting path into sales that, you know, many HubSpotters go on. And I think my advice for those sellers is just to slow down, slow down to speed up later in the conversation or the dialogue. And it's hard, right? It's hard because, you kind of don't know what you don't know. And at the same time, we want to make sure that they feel they're in an environment where they can make mistakes. Now, our small business team could teach us all a thing or two about execution and delivering results. But for sure, put yourself in the shoes of the prospect. A calm, considered, slow conversation is way more interesting than, I got 5 things I want to say. I'm kind of interested in what you want to say, but what about these 5 things? It's like you're missing it. You're definitely missing the trick.
Yeah, and I think in that scenario as well, you risk making the prospect feel like they're in a sausage factory of like a sales process. And nobody ever wants to feel like they're just being pushed through a process. And like you're right, like some of our slowest sales, and not just because of the kind of organizations we're speaking to, but some of the slowest sales end up being the largest kind of engagements that we end up having, because we've had time to consider, look at other options, as in look at the wider piece, where does different things fit. And I think that's important. Like that's that slow down to, was it thinking fast, acting.
And you know what's interesting? Like the best sellers of the future, the best sales leaders of the future, there isn't a type. Like they're not coming from one place. We have people in sales roles now who used to be teachers, who used to work in hospitality, and you sort of think, well, what's the common thread there? Dealing with people, publicly, giving service in real time, being comfortable to have a conversation with somebody. It's nothing to do with mainframes or code, or all of that stuff is really important, but they're kind of table stakes, right? Can you manage pipeline? Can you updates in CRM? Can you demo software? Okay, brilliant. You wouldn't be at the table unless you could do those things. And you know what? As long as you can just do them reasonably well, we'll coach and we'll enable and we'll train. But are you emotionally intelligent? Are you aware of what's going on in the deal, when you're sitting in the office, when you're at home, in terms of how you regulate your own behaviors and how you feel, because that impacts performance? We talked about that a few minutes ago. And the other thing is, all of that shows up in your impact on people, other people. And and I know, if I said to you, name somebody who, when they come in a room, the air just disappears, the whole thing. And
do you want me to actually name them? Or
no. I know you would. And the opposite is true too, right? Like, you can see some people join a call or walk into a room, and just the energy rises. That's got nothing to do with targets or my ability to close software deals. But I guarantee you, more of that type of trait is what the real successful people in sales in the future will be. And like I said, they can come from anywhere because they're interested in people. In fact, I'm going on a tangent here, but it's connected to the recruitment effort. And we have a ton of people to hire. So I'm, again, feeling very lucky about the opportunities for HubSpot ahead. But I think sometimes in recruitment, and not necessarily in HubSpot, because it's a pretty refined way in which we try and seek out the best talent. But in my previous roles and experience, we sometimes bang the drum on interviewing and testing for technical skills. And in my career, nobody ever doesn't work out because they missed something technically. They don't work out because they're not a good fit culturally, or they just don't have that resilience and that attitude and that positive energy. And I think for tech companies into the future, open your eyes up to those people are everywhere. And that person could be a barman, that person could be driving a taxi, that person could be working in a school. And if they can make a pivot into tech sales, like you can have an amazing career if success and financial reward is important. And I guess that is for most because we work to live.
Well, and so like having that baseline knowledge is important, right? So like people want to you to be able to answer those kind of like baseline questions. Can the system do this? Can it connect to this?
Yeah,
like on a level. I think when I listen to our sales team's conversations, so like we do a lot of training, like the conversations are recorded, we give feedback on them, all that kind of stuff. And when I listen to those, the most effective sales conversations are the ones where they know not when to shut up, but when to say, that's above my pay grade. I don't know the answer to that, but I know how to get you the answer, and I will get you that straight after this call. We'll follow up in the email. And I think that for me is one of the more important in tech sales, super important skill is knowing when to kind of not bullshit it, but like kind of elaborate on what you think it might be. And also knowing when actually I don't know, but I will tell you.
Yeah. And it's really interesting. You mentioned recordings and listening and so on. So it's important for the seller to be able to be self-aware, to know that kind of stuff, because that'll make them have a better process and be more successful. But when we hire in managers, so people who actually have to manage 7 or 8 people to do the job we're talking about, the technology that's available now, we use Gong, and conversational intelligence is built into our platform too. Our best managers probably spend a chunk of time listening to calls and quality checking. And then when you're having a coaching conversation, it's not just some sort of aspirational grow model. It's actually, listen, you're saying this at this moment in a conversation, and I think you need to listen to these 3 calls. And, success leaves clues. You know what I mean? Like our P clubbers, they're not off in a dark room in a basement doing something magical. They've just worked out their process. They're probably the kind of personality we've talked about that works in sales because we're people. And you need to just do more of that. And you need to expose yourself to what's working, and you need to try and replicate it with your own kind of personality. I always think that has a place. But look for where the gains can be made. And I love the fact that you guys listen into calls. We do it all the time too.
Well, and this actually comes back to one of the points we made earlier, is that reflection being like an important skill. So like the best salespeople I know are able to reflect on their process, are constantly like, and you have the funerals, we have the postmortems, and we're trying to figure out how we can improve, and listening back to how you handled something, and being self-reflective, but also being open to critique, not necessarily criticism, but being challenged on the way you do things. I think they are important skills. And actually, similarly, the best marketers that I know also listen to sales calls, because that's where you're getting the real questions, the real insight. And then it's basically a blueprint for what you need to be writing, what you need to be delivering from a sales message, marketing messaging.
Yeah. No, it's, in some ways it's not rocket science, is it? But we complicate it. That's
don't say that. We'll make it look hard.
Yeah, it's very hard.
You mentioned it, and I won't keep you too much longer. But you mentioned there, you were talking about emotional intelligence. So, particularly in a sales context, is that something that can be learned and nurtured, or is it like IQ? You're born with it. You get what you're given. I know there's some debates around that as well. But like, can you nurture and learn emotional intelligence?
First of all, it's vital. Like when I'm asked what's the most important thing about high performance salespeople, or what do I value, let's say, I would say emotional intelligence, and that ability to be self-aware and to be aware within groups. Because if you're aware, you can regulate your behavior to make a better impact. So it's absolutely vital. I do think something like EQ is a bit innate. I know for sure we can all improve wherever our waterline is in any aspect of what we're doing. So for sure, I think people can hone that skill and they can get better at it. But when we're looking to hire people, even early stage in the career, there's things that we look for that show us that they've got that self-awareness or they've got that emotional intelligence. Now, if somebody is very self-aware and says, "Well, I don't have emotional intelligence," I think the fact that they would even say that sentence suggests that they do, and you got to unlock it a little bit and help people on the journey. But I think it's probably a little bit hardwired into us as people and personalities and traits that are handed down from parents and so on. Like when I think about salespeople, I could nearly put a line down the middle of a sheet. And on the left-hand side is all that technical stuff about, oh, you're great at prospecting and deal management and updating CRMs and closing and demos. Fantastic. But I want to know who's going to turn up, right? Who is on the call, in the room, in the office, and what's the attitude like? And if people like, we've been in rooms where you kind of go, oh my God, I can't believe he or she said that. Like that tone deafness in a highly competitive industry where the sum of our parts are also improved because of our differences has no place. And if that's who you are, you're probably not going to work in sales, but that doesn't mean your skill set couldn't be incredibly interesting in somewhere else. I'm focused on sellers in tech, and I think it's really vital that you have that sense of yourself and that humility. Like, I mean, we could talk all day about heart and values, and the HubSpot game there, but honestly, like there was a time in my career, the late 1900s, when Jesus, humble salespeople were nearly ran out the door. But that pivot to inside selling as a strategic discipline versus call centers where it's hammering numbers, and that focus and realization through the pandemic that shit, empathy really works. That's been amazing, and that makes the place so much more interesting because the characters we're bringing in are have got those traits in spades, and they're just good people to be around.
So my second to last question, and this is always my favorite question, is what's your biggest career fuck up to date?
Well, I'm not being evasive. I will totally answer that question, but I'll tell you something, right? I know this might sound sort of dramatic. I don't take myself too seriously in work, right? I'm not that dramatic in terms of the contribution that I make. I don't think the sun sets on anything I say or do. And because of that, I've never had the feeling of, oh my God, I've really fucked up there, because everything is fluid and, whatever. Like, you can have the best laid plans in the world and something happens and you've got to pivot and move. And I'm always happy to do that. I enjoy that. I think, like, I dropped out of college post kind of secondary school. So I'm a college dropout, and I used to sort of hide that a little bit and you'd be a tiny bit embarrassed about it. I'm thrilled about it now. I think it sort of made me halfway as interesting.
I mean, you're in a good club in the tech, aren't you?
Yeah, I think now I did end up going back, right? And I got my badges because I've definitely had a chip on my shoulder when I grew up, because I've got 3 siblings. I've got an older sister and 2 younger brothers. My sister's a teacher, and my 2 brothers, one is an engineer and the other's an accountant. I mean, you could draw them, right? You could literally draw them when you were 6. And I used to always enjoy listening to my mother try and explain to her sisters what Crevan did. I'm pretty sure she still thinks I sell laptops, by the way. But I had that sort of sales, God, way back when everybody with a laptop and a mobile phone and a suit was a salesperson. And, the financial crash in kind of 07, 08, that's where I didn't lose my job, because I differentiated myself and I wanted sales to be a really professional pursuit. So I ended up going back and, ended up doing an MBA part-time with that entrepreneur guy who helped me fund it. So incredibly grateful about that. But I think, I don't think there's been a major fuck up. I do think not speaking up earlier in my career when I felt like my voice probably wasn't the most informed or potentially interesting one in the room. And I think we've all been in those rooms where, there's a meeting going on and you're nearly rehearsing what it is you think you should say, and you just don't shoot your shot. And you have that frustration. Definitely went through a period of that, and I kind of have some regrets about that. But sales as a professional pursuit really excites me, because whatever's going on in the economy, there's always an opportunity to do it better, and there's always space to improve, because no matter what's happening, and this is a particularly volatile period right now, companies will decide, okay, this is our growth plan, and they need help with those things, and we're in a position where we can give that help.
Good answer. I like it. There's probably a career in politics as well. You've evaded it, but don't make me feel
Ed is probably texting in. His forecast 2 weeks ago wasn't great.
So, last question, and then I'll let you go and enjoy the Friday sun. Who do you think I should interview next?
Well, I watched a few of these in prep, and I love the team, and I love the vibe. And I love the fact that it's not just HubSpot. I think you definitely have the mix right in terms of external and internal people. Look, on behalf of HubSpot, I think you'd have a very interesting conversation with somebody like Anne-Marie Costigan, who's our global head of renewals. Yeah. Really interesting background, fantastic colleague. But there's a bunch of them, and I could probably send you a shopping list of names after this. I might ping you one or two externally as well who might enjoy this type of conversation. But yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it, Rich.
Thank you for joining. I mean, you are the first guest that we've gone over the hour, and I don't know what the crowd think, but I personally really enjoyed the conversation. So thanks for joining me, Crevan. It was good.
Yeah, fun. Me too. And listen, I'll either see you in Manchester or I'll see you in Dublin, I'm sure, over the next period, and I look forward to it, buddy.
All right, Crevan. See you later.
Thanks, Rich.